The bitter December wind howled through the ancient pines, drowning out the soft whimpers of 6-year-old Lily Williams. Her small body trembled uncontrollably as she huddled against the massive trunk of a fallen oak, clutching her puppy Max to her chest. Tears froze on her cheeks as night crept closer. "Daddy will find us," she whispered to Max, but her voice quavered with uncertainty. Her pink backpack, now emptied of the snacks she'd brought, lay useless beside her. Darkness was falling fast, and with it, the temperature plummeted. George Thompson stood 50 yards away, watching. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as a cruel smile played across his thin lips. "Let nature take its course," he muttered, zipping up his expensive jacket. "The wolves will come soon enough." He'd chosen this spot carefully, deep enough that a child couldn't find her way out, known for its wolf pack. He turned and walked back toward his black SUV, satisfaction warming him despite the cold. Andrew would finally know what it felt like to lose everything. From the shadows of the forest's edge, two sets of eyes observed, one belonging to a small gray wolf pup, the other to a hulking figure astride a rumbling Harley. The biker's weathered face remained impassive behind his graying beard, but his calloused hand clenched the handlebar until his knuckles whitened. The wolf pup darted forward toward the child, and after a moment's hesitation, the biker cut his engine. Jack Reynolds hadn't always been the imposing figure that the locals whispered about. 15 years ago, he'd been the co-owner of Reynolds and Williams Construction, with a beautiful wife named Sarah, a daughter named Emma, and a sprawling Victorian home in Millfield's most prestigious neighborhood. His weathered face had once been clean-shaven, his now calloused hands had signed million-dollar contracts, and his eyes, now permanently narrowed in suspicion, had once crinkled easily with laughter. But that was before the accident that claimed Emma's life on a rainy April morning, before Sarah succumbed to grief a year later, before his business partner Andrew Williams had stood by while Jack was framed for fraud and sent to prison for 5 years. Now at 55, Jack lived alone in a cabin at the forest's edge, his only companions the rumble of his Harley and the occasional company of the Devil's Mercy Motorcycle Club, men who judged him only by his loyalty, not his past. Andrew Williams had continued to flourish in Jack's absence. At 50, his salt and pepper hair and tailored suits projected an image of respectability and success. Reynolds and Williams had become simply Williams Enterprises, expanding beyond construction into real estate development across 3 states. His wife Margaret managed their social calendar with precision, ensuring their name appeared regularly in charity gala programs. Their daughter Lily was the light of Andrew's life, precocious, kind, and bearing an uncanny resemblance to Jack's Emma, though Andrew rarely allowed himself to acknowledge this uncomfortable fact. What few knew was how often Andrew woke in cold sweats, haunted by the memory of his former partner's face as he was led away in handcuffs, and the nagging doubt that had grown over the years. Had he been wrong about Jack's guilt? George Thompson had been Andrew's friend since their days in elementary school baseball. Where Andrew was charismatic and ambitious, George was calculating and envious. At 52, he maintained the title of Chief Financial Officer at Williams Enterprises, but his gambling debts and failed investments had left him bitter. He'd helped fabricate the evidence against Jack years ago, a fact known only to him. Every day, watching Andrew's success from the sidelines fed a resentment that had festered into hatred, not just for Andrew, but for the happiness he represented. And now George had finally found a way to make Andrew suffer as he had suffered, through the person Andrew loved most. Jack Reynolds had established a routine in the 7 years since his release from prison. Each morning before dawn, he'd ride his Harley to the edge of Blackwood Forest, park beside an old ranger station, and hike 3 miles into the wilderness. The locals speculated about what a former businessman turned hardened biker might be doing in the forest every day. Drug drops, illegal hunting, or worse. The truth was far more mundane. Jack found peace among the ancient trees that demanded nothing from him. Unlike people, the forest never judged, never betrayed, never abandoned. That late September morning had started like any other. Jack had parked his bike, adjusted his leather jacket against the autumn chill, and begun his usual trek. He carried only a small backpack containing a thermos of black coffee, a worn copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. 3 miles in, at a clearing beside a small creek, Jack settled onto a fallen log that had served as his thinking spot for years. It was here, halfway through his coffee, that he first heard the whimpering. Probably just a wounded rabbit, he muttered to himself, trying to return to his book. But the sound persisted, weak, desperate, and unmistakably young. With a reluctant sigh, Jack set down his thermos and followed the noise to a hollow beneath a massive oak that had been uprooted in a recent storm. There, trembling in a bed of leaves, lay a wolf pup no bigger than a house cat. Its gray fur was matted with dirt, its eyes barely open. And when it saw Jack, it attempted a growl that came out as a pitiful squeak. "Where's your mama, little one?" Jack looked around cautiously. A mother wolf was not something he wanted to encounter. But after 20 minutes of searching, he found no sign of an adult wolf, only tracks suggesting the mother had been killed by something larger, possibly a bear. The pup was alone, abandoned to a fate Jack knew all too well. "You're on your own now," Jack told the pup, already turning to leave. He made it 3 steps before stopping, cursing under his breath. His calloused hand ran through his graying beard as he battled with himself. Getting involved was a fool's game. He'd learned that lesson at tremendous cost. But something in the pup's desperate eyes pulled at memories he'd tried for years to bury. "Damn it all," Jack growled, turning back. He knelt and carefully picked up the pup, which was too weak to resist. "Just until you can fend for yourself," he told the trembling ball of fur. "Don't get any ideas about this being permanent." Back at his spot by the creek, Jack fashioned a small nest from his jacket. He tore his sandwich into tiny pieces, soaked some in water from the creek, and offered them to the pup. At first, the creature refused to eat, but hunger eventually overcame fear. As the wolf pup ate from his hand, Jack felt something stir within him, a feeling he thought had died alongside his daughter and wife. It wasn't quite hope or joy, but perhaps the distant cousin of both. For the next 2 weeks, Jack's forest routine changed. He built a small shelter for the pup near his thinking spot, brought proper dog food and clean water daily, and even fashioned a makeshift bed from an old blanket he'd found in his cabin. He named the pup Scout, though he told himself it was just for convenience, not attachment. He never took Scout back to his cabin, convinced that maintaining distance was better for both of them. Wild animals belonged in the wild, and broken men belonged alone. By mid-October, Scout had grown stronger. The pup would wait eagerly at the edge of the clearing for Jack's arrival each morning, bounding toward him with increasing confidence. Jack found himself waking earlier, preparing more elaborate meals for his forest companion, and even talking to Scout about things he'd never told another living soul, about Emma's laugh, about Sarah's kindness, about the betrayal that had cost him everything. "You know, my Emma always wanted a dog," Jack told Scout one crisp November morning as the pup gnawed on a beef bone. "Sarah was allergic, so we never got one. Maybe things would have been different if we had." He scratched behind Scout's ears, an affectionate gesture he would have denied if anyone had witnessed it. "You're not a dog, though. You're a wolf. Sooner or later, you'll remember that and be gone." But Scout didn't leave. Instead, the pup grew more attached to Jack, following him partway back to the ranger station each evening, before reluctantly returning to the forest. Jack started leaving his leather jacket in Scout's shelter, telling himself it was just to give the pup something with his scent on those cold nights. He didn't acknowledge, even to himself, how much he'd come to depend on Scout's enthusiastic greetings, or how the pup's presence had begun to thaw something frozen inside him. "The thing about trust," Jack said to Scout one day as they sat beside the creek, "is once it's broken, it doesn't fix easy. People like Andrew and George, they take everything you love and don't even look back to see what they've destroyed." Scout cocked his head, ears perked attentively. "But you wouldn't know about that kind of betrayal, would you? Lucky you." Jack almost smiled then. Almost. The expression felt foreign on his face after so many years of scowling. As November drew to a close and the first flurries of snow began to dust Blackwood Forest, Jack Reynolds, feared by locals, abandoned by society, and hardened by loss, had unknowingly formed his first real bond in 15 years with a creature society had similarly cast aside. Neither man nor wolf recognized yet how this unlikely connection would soon change both their lives, or how it would lead Jack down a path toward a confrontation with the very past he'd been hiding from in these ancient woods. Max, the small terrier pup Andrew had given Lily for her birthday, yipped excitedly from his carrier in the back seat. George led Lily deeper into the woods, deliberately taking confusing turns, moving ever further from the road. "Let's find the perfect Christmas tree," he suggested. "One that could go right in your living room." "But Daddy already ordered our tree," Lily said, puzzled but still trusting. "This is just for fun," George assured her. A game. By the time they reached the massive fallen oak, the one George had scouted weeks earlier, darkness had nearly fallen, and the temperature had dropped significantly. Lily was beginning to look worried. "Uncle George, I'm cold. Can we go back now?" "In a minute." George set down the small backpack he'd brought. "First, let's have a little snack." He pulled out a juice box and some cookies, which Lily accepted gratefully. As she ate, George casually moved a few steps away. "You know, Lily, your dad and I have been friends for a very long time." "I know, since you were little, like me." "That's right, and in all that time, your dad has always gotten everything he wanted." George's voice hardened almost imperceptibly. "The best toys, the best grades, the best job, the best family." Lily looked up, confused by his tone. "Daddy works really hard. That's what Mom says." "Does he? Or does he just take what belongs to other people?" George checked his watch. Andrew would be arriving at home about now, finding Margaret worried about Lily's whereabouts. "Your dad took something very important from me once, and from another man named Jack Reynolds." "Who's Jack Reynolds?" Lily asked, her small brow furrowed. "Someone your father destroyed." George zipped up his jacket. "Just like he's destroying me bit by bit every day." "I want to go home now," Lily said, her voice small. Max whimpered in her arms, sensing her distress. George looked down at her, this child who represented everything he'd been denied. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across his face. Then it hardened into resolve. "I'm afraid I can't take you home, Lily," he said coldly. "You're going to stay here in the fairy forest. If you're very lucky, perhaps the wolves will find you before you freeze." Lily's eyes widened with terror. "Uncle George, please." "Your backpack has some snacks and water. That's more than Jack's daughter had when she died. More than your father deserves." He turned and began walking away. "Don't leave us," Lily cried, clutching Max to her chest. "I'm scared." George paused, looking back at the small figure huddled against the fallen oak. For 1 second, remorse threatened to overwhelm him. Then he thought of Andrew's face when he realized his precious daughter was missing. The same expression Jack Reynolds had worn 15 years ago as his world collapsed. "Goodbye, Lily," George said, disappearing into the darkening forest, leaving behind a frightened child, a whimpering puppy, and the tinkling melody of Silent Night still playing from the snow globe that had fallen into the snow. Jack had been on edge all day. Scout hadn't met him at their usual spot that morning, something that hadn't happened since they'd first formed their unlikely bond. By afternoon, as heavy snow began to fall, Jack's concern had grown into a gnawing worry that surprised him with its intensity. He'd spent an extra 2 hours searching the area around Scout's shelter, calling out for the wolf pup despite feeling foolish for doing so. Now, as twilight approached and the temperature plummeted, Jack reluctantly prepared to head back to his cabin. "Damn animal probably found his real family," Jack muttered, trying to convince himself he didn't care. He zipped up his leather jacket and adjusted his worn backpack. Better this way anyhow. But the words rang hollow in the silent forest. He had just reached the old ranger station where his Harley waited when he heard it, a familiar yipping sound, but with an urgent tone he'd never heard before. Jack turned to see Scout bounding toward him through the snow, the wolf pup's normally playful demeanor replaced by something that looked remarkably like distress. "There you are," Jack said, relief flooding through him despite himself. "Where have you been hiding all day?" Scout circled Jack frantically, nipping at his jeans, then darting several yards back into the forest before returning to repeat the behavior. The pup's message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spoken English. "Follow me." "Not today, Scout. Storm's coming." Jack gestured at the darkening sky. "Whatever squirrel you're chasing can wait till tomorrow." But Scout was insistent, his behavior growing more desperate with each passing minute. Something deep in Jack's gut, an instinct he'd learned to trust during his years in prison, told him this was important. With a resigned sigh, he turned away from his motorcycle and back toward the forest. "Lead the way, then. But this better be good." George Thompson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the December snow blanket the Williams Enterprises parking lot. In his hand, he clutched the invitation to the company's annual Christmas gala, a lavish affair where Andrew would once again play the benevolent king, accepting accolades for his charitable foundation, while George sat at a side table, barely acknowledged despite his 25 years with the company. The paper crumpled in his fist as his jaw tightened. This morning's board meeting had been the final straw. Andrew had rejected George's proposal for the third time this year, while approving the half-baked idea of some 20-something MBA fresh out of college. "George, you're practically family," Andrew had said, his hand patronizingly heavy on George's shoulder. "But we need to innovate, not play it safe. That's how we built this company." We, as if George hadn't been there from the beginning. As if he hadn't been the one who suggested framing Jack Reynolds when their risky investment went south, saving Andrew's reputation while sacrificing Jack's. As if he hadn't kept Andrew's dirtiest secrets for decades while watching his own career stagnate. From his vantage point, George could see Andrew now, crossing the parking lot to his Tesla, phone pressed to his ear, laughing, probably talking to Margaret about their upcoming ski vacation in Aspen, or perhaps about Lily's school Christmas pageant where she was playing the lead angel. Perfect Andrew with his perfect family. It made George sick. "Family," George muttered bitterly. "Let's see how well you function without your precious family." The idea that had been germinating in the darkest corners of his mind for months suddenly crystallized. He knew what would destroy Andrew Williams more thoroughly than any financial ruin or public scandal ever could. That evening, George drove to Andrew's neighborhood under the pretense of dropping off some contracts that needed immediate signatures. The Williams Tudor-style mansion was ablaze with Christmas lights, and through the large bay windows, George could see Lily practicing her pageant lines in the living room, her small hands gesturing dramatically as Margaret watched adoringly. Andrew was nowhere to be seen, probably still at the office or at some business dinner. Perfect. George knocked on the door, contracts in hand, his most unctuous smile fixed in place. Margaret welcomed him warmly. She always did, naive woman that she was. "Andrew's running late at the Mallister meeting," she explained, inviting him in. "But you're welcome to wait. We just finished dinner, but I can fix you a plate." "No need to trouble yourself," George replied. "I can't stay long, but I did bring something for Lily, for good luck at her pageant." He pulled a small gift-wrapped package from his coat pocket. Lily bounded over, her eyes lighting up. "Thank you, Uncle George." At 6 years old, she was trusting and affectionate, just like Emma Reynolds had been before the accident. The resemblance had always disturbed George, though he couldn't articulate why. "Why don't you open it now?" George suggested, his voice deliberately warm. Inside was a small snow globe featuring a miniature forest scene. "It plays music," George demonstrated, winding the key at the bottom. A tinkling melody filled the room. Silent night. "It's beautiful," Lily breathed, shaking it to send the artificial snow swirling. "You know what else is magical?" George leaned down conspiratorially. "The real forest in the snow. I was driving by Blackwood earlier, and it looks just like your snow globe. The trees are all frosted like a fairy tale. Can we go see, Mom?" "Please." Lily turned to Margaret, eyes pleading. "Maybe this weekend, sweetheart. It's a school night." Margaret smiled apologetically at George. "You've got her all excited now." "The best views are at sunset," George pressed, checking his watch theatrically. "Which is happening right now. Tell you what, I need to drive past there anyway. Why don't I take Lily for a quick look? 20 minutes tops. We can call Andrew to meet us on his way home." Margaret hesitated. "I don't know." "Please, Mom, I want to see the fairy forest." Lily was practically bouncing with excitement. "Uncle George will have me back before bedtime, promise." George placed a hand over his heart. Scout's honor. The irony of invoking Scout's honor wasn't lost on him. 15 minutes later, George's SUV pulled onto the narrow access road that led into Blackwood Forest. Beside him, Lily clutched her snow globe, eyes wide as she took in the snow-covered pines. True to his word, the scene was magical. Pristine white blankets covering the ground, branches heavy with snow, the last rays of sunlight casting long blue shadows. "Can we get out and look?" Lily asked. "Of course." George parked in a small clearing and helped her out of the car. "Bring your puppy too. He'd love to see this." Scout didn't waste a second, immediately taking off into the trees with Jack following behind. They moved deeper into the forest than their usual haunts, the wolf pup periodically stopping to ensure Jack was still following before continuing with determined purpose. The snow was falling heavily now, creating a muffled stillness broken only by Jack's labored breathing and the occasional crack of a snow-laden branch. After nearly a mile, Scout suddenly stopped, ears perked forward. Jack strained to hear what had captured the pup's attention, and that's when it reached him. A child's cry, faint but unmistakable, carried on the winter wind. "What the hell?" Jack broke into a run, following Scout through a dense thicket of pines. They emerged into a small clearing dominated by a massive fallen oak. Huddled against its trunk was a small figure in a pink coat, clutching what appeared to be a puppy. Jack's heart nearly stopped. For one impossible moment, he thought he was looking at Emma, his Emma, just as she'd been the last day he saw her alive. The same size, the same golden hair peeking out from a knit cap, even a similar coat. Then the child looked up, and though the resemblance was still striking, he could see this was a different girl. But the visceral shock of that first impression left him momentarily frozen. "Are you a bad man?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with cold and fear. The question jolted Jack back to reality. "No," he said, his gruff voice softening despite himself. "I'm not a bad man. Are you lost?" She nodded, tears freezing on her pale cheeks. "Uncle George left us here. He said the wolves would eat us." Her arms tightened protectively around the puppy, which whimpered softly. Something cold that had nothing to do with the winter weather settled in Jack's stomach. Who would leave a child to die in these woods? And why? That name, George, stirred something unpleasant in his memory. "What's your name, kid?" Jack asked, crouching down to her level, careful to move slowly so as not to frighten her further. "Lily Williams," she said, and Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Williams. It couldn't be a coincidence. "This is Max," she added, indicating the puppy. "Are you going to help us?" Jack's mind raced. If this was Andrew Williams' daughter, his former partner, the man who had stood by while Jack's life was systematically destroyed, then walking away would be the simplest form of justice. Let Andrew know what it felt like to lose a child. Let him spend the rest of his life wondering, just as Jack had spent 15 years wondering how things might have been different if he'd picked Emma up from school himself that day instead of sending their nanny. Scout nudged Jack's hand insistently, breaking his dark reverie. The wolf pup moved to Lily's side, surprisingly gentle as he nuzzled against her. The girl's initial fear gave way to wonder as she hesitantly reached out to touch Scout's fur. "Is this your doggy?" she asked Jack. "He found us earlier. He brought us cookies from my backpack when we were really hungry." Jack looked at Scout with newfound astonishment. The wolf pup had been here already, had been trying to help, and now he'd brought Jack, the only human he trusted, to do what he could not. "Something like that," Jack answered, making his decision. Whatever Andrew Williams had done, this child was innocent. And Jack Reynolds was not a man who abandoned innocence to die, no matter how hard he'd tried to become such a man over the years. "Let's get you someplace warm, Lily." Jack shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around the shivering child, then carefully lifted her and the puppy into his arms. "Hold on tight now. What about my snow globe?" Lily pointed to a glittering object half buried in the snow. "Uncle George gave it to me." Jack shifted Lily's weight to one arm and retrieved the globe. Inside was a miniature forest scene, eerily similar to their current surroundings. A cold suspicion formed in his mind. This hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone had planned this carefully, had prepared a gift to lure the child into the forest. George. The name still tugged at his memory, but he couldn't quite place it. "I've got it," he assured her, pocketing the globe. "Now let's move before we all freeze." The trek back to the ranger station was slow and difficult with Lily in his arms. Scout led the way, frequently doubling back as if checking on their progress. The storm had intensified, visibility dropping to mere feet in front of them. Jack's cabin was closer than town, and in this weather, the safest option. "We're going to my house," he told Lily as they finally reached his Harley. "It's not far, then we'll call your parents." Lily looked up at him with absolute trust that made something twist painfully in Jack's chest. "Thank you, mister. Scout knew you'd save us." Once Lily was warming by the fire with hot chocolate cradled in her small hands, Jack reached for his seldom-used landline phone. Cell service was non-existent this far out, especially in a storm. The phone line was dead, likely knocked out by the blizzard. "Looks like we're stuck here till morning," he told Lily, trying to keep his voice light. "Roads will be impassable now anyway. We'll call your folks first thing, I promise." Lily nodded solemnly. "Mommy will be so worried, and Daddy too." "Your daddy," Jack said carefully. "Is his name Andrew Williams?" Lily's face brightened. "Yes." "Do you know my daddy?" "We knew each other a long time ago," Jack said, the understatement of the century. "And this Uncle George who left you in the forest, is he your real uncle?" Lily shook her head. "He's Daddy's best friend since they were little. He works at Daddy's company. He has a shiny office with big windows." Her bottom lip trembled. "He said Daddy took something from him, and from a man named Jack. Then he left us in the snow." Jack nearly dropped the mug he was holding. George Thompson, Andrew's childhood friend who had become CFO at their company. The same George who had discovered the fraudulent paperwork that had sent Jack to prison. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "Why would Uncle George do that?" Lily asked, her small brow furrowed. "Was it because I was bad?" Jack sat down heavily beside her. "No, Lily. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults do terrible things because they're hurting inside. It doesn't make it right, but it's not your fault. Like when Tommy at school pushed me because his parents were getting divorced." "Something like that," Jack agreed, marveling at the simple wisdom children sometimes possessed. Only much, much worse. As the night wore on, Jack made up a bed for Lily on his couch. She fell asleep quickly, exhausted by her ordeal, with Max curled against her side and Scout lying protectively on the floor beside them. Jack sat in his worn armchair, watching them, his mind a turbulent mix of memories and realizations. For 15 years, he'd blamed Andrew Williams exclusively for his downfall. Now it seemed George Thompson had been the architect of his destruction and had nearly added child murder to his crimes. But why? What could possibly drive a man to such extremes? Jack's contemplation was interrupted by Lily's small voice. "Mr. Jack," she murmured sleepily. "Are you the Jack that Uncle George was talking about?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. Yes. Did my daddy really take something from you?" The question hung in the air as Jack considered how to answer. The truth was complex, possibly too much for a child to understand. Yet something in Lily's earnest gaze demanded honesty. "I thought he did," Jack finally said. "For a long time, I was very angry at your father, but now I'm not so sure what really happened." Lily seemed to accept this, her eyelids drooping. "Daddy says when you're not sure about something, you should ask questions before you decide." Her words slurred as sleep reclaimed her. "Maybe you should ask Daddy your questions." Out of the mouths of babes, Jack thought. Maybe she was right. Maybe after 15 years of bitterness and isolation, it was time to face Andrew Williams and hear his side of the story. But first, they had to survive the night and get Lily safely home. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having passed overnight. Jack was already awake, having slept little. He'd spent hours thinking about the path that had led him here, to this impossible situation, harboring the daughter of his sworn enemy, yet feeling more human than he had in years simply by helping her. "Rise and shine, kid," he called gently to Lily. "Weather's cleared. Time to get you home." As Lily ate the simple breakfast he'd prepared, Jack attempted the phone again. This time he got a dial tone. His hand hesitated over the receiver. The sensible thing would be to call the sheriff, report finding a missing child, and step back from the situation. But that would mean questions he wasn't prepared to answer, and potential suspicion falling on the ex-con who just happened to find a wealthy businessman's daughter in the woods. Number better to take Lily directly to her parents, face whatever came next head-on. The ride into Millfield was tense, Jack hyper-aware of the precious cargo secured before him on the Harley. Lily had insisted on bringing both Max and Scout, the latter riding surprisingly placidly in the makeshift carrier that had previously held the puppy. Jack had argued against bringing the wolf pup into town, but had ultimately relented when Scout made it clear he wasn't being left behind. The Williams mansion sat on 3 manicured acres at the edge of Millfield's most exclusive neighborhood. As they approached the imposing gates, Jack felt a flood of conflicting emotions, resentment at the wealth Andrew had continued to accumulate while he lost everything, satisfaction at knowing he was about to disrupt Andrew's perfect world, and an unexpected anxiety about how Lily would be received. Would they think he had something to do with her disappearance? The property was a hive of activity. Police cars lined the circular driveway, and Jack could see what appeared to be search teams organizing on the front lawn. He pulled up to the gate, and instantly 2 officers approached with hands on their weapons. "Sir, this is a restricted area. There's a police operation in progress," one began, then stopped abruptly as he caught sight of Lily. "Wait, is that Lily?" The scream came from the house as a woman in a bathrobe burst through the front door and ran down the driveway. Margaret Williams, her face tear-streaked and haggard from a sleepless night, reached through the gates with trembling hands. "Mommy!" Lily cried, scrambling off the motorcycle and pressing herself against the bars of the gate. Everything happened quickly after that. The gates swung open. Margaret gathered Lily into a desperate embrace. Officers surrounded Jack with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. And somewhere in the chaos, Andrew Williams emerged from the house, running toward his daughter with an expression of disbelieving joy. It wasn't until Lily was safely in her parents' arms, breathlessly explaining about the forest and the snow and Scout saving her, that Andrew looked up and truly saw the man who had brought his daughter home. The color drained from his face as recognition dawned. "Jack," he whispered, the single syllable carrying 15 years of complicated history. Jack Reynolds straightened to his full height, meeting his former partner's gaze unflinchingly. "Hello, Andrew. I believe we have some things to discuss." Between them, Lily looked back and forth, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Daddy, this is Mr. Jack. He saved me when Uncle George left me in the forest. And this is Scout." She pointed proudly to the wolf pup, who sat calmly beside Jack's leg, surveying the commotion with alert yellow eyes. Andrew stiffened. George Thompson left you in the forest." His voice was dangerously quiet. "He said you took something from him, and from Mr. Jack," Lily confirmed innocently. "Then he said the wolves would eat me." Andrew's face contorted with a complex mixture of emotions, horror at what his friend had done, confusion as he looked at Jack, and dawning comprehension as pieces of a 15-year-old puzzle began to shift into new patterns. "Officers," Andrew said without taking his eyes off Jack, "I believe we need to locate George Thompson immediately. He's apparently responsible for my daughter's abduction." The police moved with new purpose, radioing in the information. One officer stepped forward. "Sir, we'll need statements from everyone, including," he gestured toward Jack with uncertainty. "Jack Reynolds," Andrew supplied, "an old friend who apparently saved my daughter's life." His voice broke on the last word, and for the first time since their reunion, Andrew's composed facade cracked. "Jack, I don't understand any of this, but thank you. Thank you for bringing her home." Jack nodded curtly, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Wasn't me who found her first. Was Scout here?" He nodded toward the wolf pup. "Seems he has better instincts about who deserves saving than I do." Before Andrew could respond, a commotion at the end of the driveway drew everyone's attention. George Thompson's black SUV had pulled up, and the man himself was emerging, his expression carefully composed into one of concern. He'd clearly come to play the part of the worried family friend, only to find his plan spectacularly derailed. "Andrew, thank God! Have they found—" George's performance faltered as he caught sight of Lily safe in her mother's arms. Then his gaze shifted to Jack, and what little color remained in his face drained away. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." It was Scout who moved first, a low growl building in his throat as he stared at the newcomer. The wolf pup took a step forward, then another, his previously calm demeanor replaced by a barely restrained aggression that made several officers reach for their weapons. "That's him," Lily said, pointing at George. "The bad man who left us in the forest." And as police officers moved to apprehend a suddenly desperate George Thompson, as Margaret clutched Lily tighter to her chest, as Andrew Williams stared at his childhood friend with dawning horror and betrayal, Jack Reynolds watched it all with the strange sense that his life had just taken yet another unexpected turn, one that might finally lead him out of the wilderness, where he'd been lost for 15 long years. The Williams mansion's opulent living room had never hosted such a tense gathering. Police officers moved efficiently through the space, collecting statements and evidence, while paramedics examined Lily on one of the cream-colored sofas, despite her repeated insistence that she was totally fine now. Margaret hovered nearby, unwilling to let her daughter out of her sight even for a moment. Max, the puppy, had been fed, warmed, and was now curled contentedly on Lily's lap, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. Scout, however, remained alert at Jack's side, yellow eyes tracking every movement in the room with wary intelligence. Jack stood awkwardly by the massive stone fireplace, feeling painfully out of place among the polished marble and crystal chandeliers. His weathered leather jacket and mud-splattered jeans contrasted starkly with Andrew's tailored clothes, a visual reminder of how far their lives had diverged. He'd given his brief statement to the authorities, explaining how he'd found Lily in the forest during the storm, omitting only the complicated history between himself and her father. Now he was waiting for a chance to leave quietly, his duty done. Sheriff Tom Davis, a steady man in his 60s who'd known Jack since before the scandal that destroyed his life, approached with a steaming mug of coffee. "Thought you could use this," the sheriff said, his weathered face thoughtful. "Quite a coincidence, you being the one to find Andrew Williams' daughter." Jack accepted the coffee with a nod. "Wasn't me who found her. Was Scout." He gestured toward the wolf pup. "I just followed." Davis hummed noncommittally. "Still, of all the people in Millfield, given your history with her father—" "Ancient history," Jack muttered, though they both knew it wasn't true. In small towns, history never became ancient. It just simmered below the surface, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. "They've picked up George Thompson," Davis said, changing the subject slightly. "Caught him at the airport with a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires and a suitcase full of cash. Not exactly the behavior of an innocent man." Jack's hand tightened around the mug. "What's he saying?" "Not much yet. Lawyered up immediately." Davis lowered his voice. "But we found something interesting in his office safe. Documents dating back 15 years. Financial records, altered transaction logs. Your name appears quite frequently." "The fraud case," Jack said flatly. Davis nodded. "Looks like someone went to a lot of trouble to make it appear you were embezzling from Reynolds and Williams Construction. Someone with accounting expertise and access to the company's most sensitive financial information." "George Thompson," Jack said flatly. "That would be my guess. Question is why?" The sheriff's shrewd eyes studied Jack's face. "And did Andrew Williams know about it?" Before Jack could respond, Andrew himself approached, his normally confident stride hesitant. Up close, Jack could see the toll the past 24 hours had taken on his former partner. The shadows under his eyes, the new lines around his mouth, the haunted look that Jack recognized all too well from his own mirror. "Sheriff, could I have a moment alone with Jack?" Andrew asked. Davis glanced between the two men, measuring the tension. "As long as you remember, this is still an active investigation scene." He moved away, positioning himself at a respectable distance, but still within eyesight. For a long moment, the two former partners stood in uncomfortable silence, 15 years of unspoken accusations and explanations hanging between them. It was Andrew who finally broke it. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said quietly. "Especially not like this." "Life's full of surprises," Jack replied with bitter irony. "Finding your daughter in Blackwood Forest during a blizzard wasn't on my bingo card either." Andrew flinched at Jack's tone. "I don't even know how to begin to thank you." "Then don't," Jack cut him off. "I didn't do it for you. I know." Andrew's gaze drifted to where Lily sat, now animatedly describing her adventure to a police officer, making Scout sound like a superhero in her telling. You did it because you're still a good man, despite everything that happened. Jack gave a harsh laugh. You don't know what kind of man I am anymore, Andrew. It's been 15 years. Prison changes a person. I can imagine. No. Jack's voice hardened. You really can't. He sat down his untouched coffee with deliberate care. Look, I've given my statement. Lily's safe. There's nothing keeping me here. Please wait. Andrew's plea was surprisingly raw. Jack, the things George did, I'm just starting to understand. The documents they found in his office. I had no idea he framed you. You have to believe that. Do I? Jack's eyes were cold. You were mighty quick to believe I was guilty 15 years ago. Didn't even visit me once in prison. My wife dead, my daughter gone, my business partner nowhere to be found. Andrew paled. It looked convincing, Jack. The evidence, the paper trail. And it was easier to believe I was guilty than to ask questions, Jack finished for him. Easier to take full control of the company we built together. Convenient how that worked out for you. The accusation hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Andrew opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a commotion at the front door. 3 men in leather jackets emblazoned with the Devil's Mercy Motorcycle Club insignia pushed past a protesting officer. Leading them was a mountain of a man with a silver beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, Mike Hammer Johnson, the closest thing Jack had to a friend these days. Jack, Hammer called, spotting him by the fireplace. Heard you were mixed up in some trouble. We came to make sure you're getting a fair shake. His eyes narrowed suspiciously at Andrew. This the ex-partner who threw you under the bus? The room had gone quiet. Police officers suddenly alert, hands drifting toward weapons. Jack moved quickly to defuse the situation. It's fine, Hammer. Just clearing up some old business. He turned to the nearest officer. These men are with me. They're not causing any trouble. Sheriff Davis approached, his expression carefully neutral. Mike, he acknowledged the biker with a nod. Don't recall inviting the Devil's Mercy to this investigation. Didn't need an invitation, Tom, Hammer replied easily. Jack's one of ours. We look after our own. An unexpected lump formed in Jack's throat. After his release from prison, when he'd had nothing and no one, the motorcycle club had embraced him without questions or judgment. They'd given him a community when the respectable citizens of Millfield had turned their backs. Andrew watched this exchange with visible surprise. The Jack Reynolds he'd known had been a polished businessman, uncomfortable around rough characters like these bikers. The realization of how completely Jack's life had transformed in his absence seemed to finally hit him. Mr. Jack! Lily's voice cut through the tension as she darted across the room, evading her mother's attempt to stop her. She skidded to a halt in front of the intimidating group of bikers, her eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. Are these your friends? Do they have cool motorcycles like yours? Hammer looked down at the small girl, his fierce expression softening unexpectedly. You must be the little lady Jack saved, he said, crouching down to her level despite his bad knees. I'm Mike, but folks call me Hammer. And yes, we all have motorcycles, though none as special as Jack's. He built that one himself, you know. Wow, Lily's admiration was genuine. Can I see them sometime? Mr. Jack said maybe he'd take me for a ride when I'm bigger. Jack, who had said no such thing, raised an eyebrow but didn't contradict her. Margaret, however, had reached her daughter's side and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. Lily, sweetheart, let's let these gentlemen talk, she said with a nervous glance at the bikers. But Mom, they're heroes like Mr. Jack, Lily protested. They probably save people all the time. The innocence of her statement created an awkward silence, broken only when Hammer let out a deep laugh. "Your daughter's got spirit, ma'am," he told Margaret. "And a good heart. Reminds me of someone else at that age." His eyes flicked meaningfully to Jack. Andrew's face suddenly drained of color. "Emma," Andrew whispered, the name escaping before he could stop it. Jack stiffened, the single word hitting him like a physical blow. Emma. His daughter's name, unspoken in this house for 15 years, yet clearly not forgotten. "You don't get to say her name," Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. Andrew's expression crumpled. "Jack, there's so much you don't know, so much I need to explain. About Emma, about Sarah, about what happened after you went to prison. I don't want to hear it." Jack's control snapped. "My daughter is dead. My wife died of grief. I spent 5 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. And you—" His voice broke. "You went on with your perfect life like I never existed." The raw pain in his voice silenced the room. Even the police officers looked away, uncomfortable with witnessing such a private agony. Lily, sensing the adult tension but not understanding it, slipped free of her mother's grip and moved to Jack's side, placing her small hand in his. "It's okay to be sad, Mr. Jack," she said with the simple wisdom of children. "When I'm sad, Daddy says it's because I have a big heart that can feel big things." Jack looked down at her, momentarily speechless. The resemblance to Emma struck him again with physical force, not just the blonde hair and blue eyes, but the compassionate spirit that had always been his daughter's most beautiful quality. Before he could respond, the front door burst open again, this time admitting several suited men who moved with the unmistakable authority of federal agents. Their leader, a stern-faced woman in her 40s, strode directly to Sheriff Davis. "Sheriff, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Carter, FBI. We're taking over the George Thompson investigation." She handed him an official-looking document. "We've been building a case against Thompson for months. Securities fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. This kidnapping attempt has accelerated our timeline." Davis skimmed the paperwork with a frown. "This is the first I'm hearing about any FBI involvement." "That's by design," Agent Carter replied crisply. "We had reason to believe Thompson had connections inside local law enforcement." Her gaze shifted to Andrew. "Mr. Williams, we'll need to speak with you as well. Our investigation suggests you may have been an unwitting accomplice in some of Thompson's financial schemes." Andrew paled. "I've done nothing wrong. I run a legitimate business." "A business built on stolen patents and fraudulent transactions," she interrupted. "The question is whether you were complicit or merely negligent in your oversight." Jack watched as Andrew's carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. There was a time when he would have savored this moment, dreamed of it during long nights in his prison cell. Now, seeing Lily's confused expression as she sensed her father's distress, he felt only a hollow exhaustion. "Agent Carter," Jack interrupted, a dangerous edge to his voice. "Where is Thompson now?" "In our custody at the county facility," Sheriff Davis answered. "Under guard." Jack turned to the FBI agent. "I want to hear this from him directly. No deals, no promises, just the truth." Agent Carter nodded slowly. "We were about to suggest the same thing. Both of you should be present for this questioning." She hesitated. "But I need to emphasize that this could be an elaborate deception. Hope is a powerful motivator, and Thompson knows it." Jack barely heard her caution. A terrible, fragile possibility had taken root, that Emma, his Emma, might be alive somewhere. The thought was almost too painful to consider, yet impossible to ignore. The next hour passed in a blur. Arrangements were made. Margaret stayed with Lily, and Jack found himself insisting that Scout accompany them, a request the authorities reluctantly granted after the wolf pup refused to be separated from him. Hammer and the other bikers followed in a procession behind the official vehicles, a silent show of support that Jack acknowledged with a grateful nod. The county detention facility was a stark, concrete building on the outskirts of Millfield. George Thompson had been placed in an interview room that looked exactly like those Jack remembered from his own arrest 15 years earlier. Beige walls, metal table bolted to the floor, uncomfortable chairs, and the ever-present mirrored glass of an observation window. Thompson looked up as they entered, his previous arrogance tempered but not extinguished by his circumstances. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth when he saw Jack and Andrew enter together, followed by Agent Carter and Sheriff Davis. The prodigal partners reunited at last, Thompson drawled. How touching. Jack fought the urge to lunge across the table, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Scout pressed against his leg, a steadying presence. No games, Thompson, Agent Carter said sharply. You claimed Emma Reynolds survived the accident. Prove it. Thompson leaned back in his chair, the chains of his handcuffs rattling against the table. Insurance. That's what good businessmen maintain. Insurance against unforeseen circumstances. His eyes flicked to Andrew. You taught me that, didn't you, Andrew? Always have leverage. Get to the point, Sheriff Davis growled. My point, Thompson continued, is that I've spent 20 years building fail-safes. When my sister came to me with concerns about the company finances, concerns that implicated both partners, I saw an opportunity. His gaze settled on Jack. Reynolds was getting too close to discovering my creative accounting. He needed to be distracted, ultimately removed. Marjorie suggested targeting what he valued most. Jack's voice was deadly quiet. My daughter. The original plan was simple. Thompson spoke with the detached tone of discussing a business transaction. Stage an accident severe enough to be fatal, replace the child with a Jane Doe of similar appearance, and use the leverage against Reynolds if needed. He paused, watching Jack's reaction. But I saw a better opportunity. Why waste perfectly good leverage? If Reynolds discovered the fraud despite his grief, I'd need more insurance. So you took her, Andrew said, horror evident in his voice. A 6-year-old child. Thompson nodded. Marjorie thought the girl died in the actual crash. It was more violent than planned. But I got there first, found her unconscious but alive. The replacement was already prepared. A child who had died of natural causes days earlier, kept in cold storage. Simple enough to switch them before emergency services arrived. Where is she? Jack demanded, leaning across the table. Where is my daughter? Thompson's smile was cold. That depends on what kind of deal I'm being offered. Agent Carter stepped forward. No deals until we verify your claim. We need proof Emma Reynolds is alive. DNA can be arranged, Thompson said smoothly. As for her location, he hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Let's just say she was placed with a family who could afford the substantial adoption fee. Such a special child commanded, a family looking for a particular type of child. Blonde, blue-eyed, from good genetic stock. A name, Jack growled. Give me a name. Thompson's eyes gleamed with malicious triumph. Are you sure you want to know, Reynolds? It might be more painful than believing she's dead. Where is my daughter? Jack slammed his palms on the table, causing everyone except Thompson to flinch. Andrew's voice was strained. Don't let him manipulate you again. He's playing with us. But Thompson's gaze had shifted, moving past Jack to fix on the mirrored window of the observation room. She's closer than you think. He leaned forward, dropping his voice to a near whisper. Tell me, Andrew, have you ever wondered why Lily looks nothing like you or Margaret? Why her blonde hair and blue eyes don't match either of your genetic profiles? Why she has Reynolds' daughter's exact birthday despite being supposedly born in a different hospital? The room went deathly silent as the implication of Thompson's words sank in. Jack felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath him, his entire world rearranging itself in one sickening moment of clarity. "No," Andrew breathed, staggering backward. "That's not possible." "Adoption records don't lie," Thompson replied with cruel satisfaction. "Though the ones I created for you certainly did." Jack turned slowly to face Andrew, a terrible suspicion dawning. "All this time," he whispered, "all this time, you had my daughter, my Emma." And as Andrew's face crumpled with shock and dawning horror, Jack knew with bone-deep certainty that Thompson was telling the truth. His Emma hadn't died 15 years ago. She had been stolen, renamed, and raised by the very man Jack had spent years hating for abandoning him to his fate. The ultimate betrayal, hidden in plain sight. The 3 days following Thompson's devastating revelation passed in a blur of DNA tests, legal consultations, and emotional turmoil, unlike anything Jack had experienced since the day he'd first been told Emma was dead. The county courthouse had become a second home, its sterile hallways and uncomfortable benches the backdrop for a drama that had captured the attention of the entire town of Millfield. The revelation that Lily Williams was actually Emma Reynolds, kidnapped, her death staged, and then adopted by Andrew and Margaret Williams through George Thompson's criminal network, had sent shockwaves through the community. Jack sat alone on a bench outside the family court judge's chambers, his weathered hands clasped tightly together to stop their trembling. Scout lay at his feet, a silent guardian who had refused to leave Jack's side throughout the ordeal. The wolf pup, now accepted as Jack's unofficial emotional support animal after Sheriff Davis's intervention, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The DNA results had confirmed everything. Lily Williams was biologically Jack Reynolds' daughter. The grave in Millfield Cemetery contained the remains of an unknown child, a tragic victim of circumstances whose identity might never be known. Andrew and Margaret Williams had been questioned extensively, their statements consistent with being unwitting participants in Thompson's scheme. Desperate for a child after years of infertility, approached by Thompson with an opportunity to adopt a child whose parents had allegedly died in an accident. They claimed they'd never known the child was Emma Reynolds, though the timing, just months after Jack's imprisonment, raised serious questions about their willful ignorance. The door to the judge's chambers opened, and Andrew emerged, looking utterly destroyed. The past 3 days had aged him a decade. Behind him, Margaret followed, her eyes red-rimmed from constant crying. They paused when they saw Jack, the weight of 15 years of unwitting complicity hanging between them. "The judge wants to see you now," Andrew said quietly. "Alone," Jack nodded, rising to his feet. Scout moved to follow, but Jack gently commanded him to stay. This was one conversation he needed to have by himself. Judge Eleanor Martinez was a formidable woman in her 60s, known for her fairness and no-nonsense approach to family court matters. She looked up from her papers as Jack entered, gesturing for him to take a seat across from her desk. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, "I've reviewed all the evidence in this extraordinary case, including the DNA results confirming that the child known as Lily Williams is biologically your daughter, Emma. I've spoken with the Williamses, with Child Protective Services, and with the psychological experts assigned to evaluate the situation." She removed her reading glasses, fixing Jack with a direct gaze. "Now I want to hear from you. What outcome are you seeking here?" The question, though expected, still hit Jack like a physical blow. What did he want? The answer seemed both blindingly simple and impossibly complex. "I want my daughter back," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've lost 15 years with her that I can never get back. Years I thought she was dead while she was being raised by—" He stopped himself, fighting for control. "But I also understand that she knows herself as Lily, She loves the Williamses as her parents. She has no memory of me, of her mother, of her life before the accident. Judge Martinez nodded, her expression softening slightly. That's correct, according to the child psychologist. Abruptly removing her from the only family she remembers would cause significant trauma. I would never want to hurt her, Jack said firmly. She's been through enough because of adult greed and malice. Then what do you propose? Jack had spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with this question. A transition period, supervised visits, gradually increasing as she becomes comfortable with me. Joint custody eventually, if the Williamses are willing. The words cost him dearly, each one acknowledging that he couldn't simply reclaim the years that had been stolen. I want her to know the truth in an age-appropriate way. I want her to know that her first father never abandoned her, never stopped loving her. But I don't want to rob her of the security she has now. Judge Martinez studied him thoughtfully. That's very generous, considering the circumstances. It's not about me, Jack said simply. It's about her. The Williamses have proposed something similar, the judge revealed. They've offered joint custody with primary residents remaining with them for now to maintain stability, but with a clear path to equal time as your relationship with Emma, Lily, develops. She paused, watching his reaction carefully. They've also proposed setting up a trust for her future using company funds, and a public statement acknowledging the wrong done to you, with full corporate resources devoted to clearing your name. Jack laughed humorlessly. Money again. That seems to be Andrew's answer to everything. I believe it's the only language he truly knows, Judge Martinez observed. But I also believe his remorse is genuine, as is his love for the child he's raised as his daughter. She leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, vengeance is a natural human impulse. Few would blame you for wanting to punish the Williamses for their part in this tragedy, unwitting though they claim it was. But revenge would come at your daughter's expense. I know, Jack acknowledged quietly. And I've had enough of sacrificing Emma for adult conflicts. Something like approval flickered in the judge's eyes. Then I believe we can craft an arrangement that centers her well-being while honoring your rights as her biological father. She made a note on the pad before her. There's one more matter. George Thompson has been denied bail given the severity of his crimes and flight risk. The prosecutor is seeking multiple charges, including kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and money laundering. He's facing life imprisonment. Good, Jack said flatly. He deserves worse. Indeed. Judge Martinez gathered her papers. We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize the custody arrangement. In the meantime, Child Protective Services has approved a supervised visit this afternoon, if you feel ready. Jack's heart leapt into his throat. Today? I can see her today? At 4 o'clock at the CPS office, the judge confirmed. Mrs. Williams, Emma, has been told that we've discovered you are her biological father, that you never knew she was alive, and that you've been looking for her for a very long time. The psychologist will be present to help facilitate the meeting. Jack nodded, suddenly overwhelmed at the prospect of truly reuniting with his daughter after 15 years of grief. Thank you, Your Honor. As he left the chambers, Jack found Andrew and Margaret still waiting in the hallway, Scout alert at their approach. The 3 adults regarded each other in awkward silence, years of tangled history between them. Jack, Andrew finally spoke. I know no apology can ever be sufficient. You're right, Jack cut him off. It can't. He took a deep breath. But Emma, Lily, needs all of us to find a way forward. So that's what we'll do. Margaret stepped forward tentatively. We want you to be part of her life, Jack. We've already told her how brave and kind her first father is, how you saved her in the forest when she was lost. She asked if Scout could come today, Andrew added. She's quite attached to him. Despite everything, Jack felt a small smile tug at his lips. Scout seems to have that effect on people. The wolf pup's ears perked up at the sound of his name, and Jack reached down to scratch his head affectionately. He'll be there. 6 months later, on a crisp fall afternoon, Jack Reynolds stood at the edge of Blackwood Forest, watching as a blonde-haired girl in a red jacket ran laughing among the trees, Scout bounding playfully at her side. The custody arrangement had evolved naturally, as Emma, who still preferred to be called Lily, though she now knew her original name, had grown increasingly comfortable with Jack. She spent every other weekend at his cabin, which he'd renovated to include a cheerful bedroom decorated in the purples and greens she loved. "Stay near the creek," Jack called, smiling as his daughter waved acknowledgement without slowing her exploration. The sound of a car approaching drew his attention. Andrew's Tesla pulled up beside Jack's Harley, and the man himself emerged, carrying a picnic basket. The relationship between the former partners remained complex, never quite friendship, but no longer the bitter enmity of before. They had found an uneasy peace for Lily's sake, united in their determination to protect her from further harm. "She seems happy," Andrew observed, watching Lily and Scout. "She is," Jack agreed. "Kids are resilient. More than we are, probably." Andrew nodded, setting down the basket. "Margaret packed enough for an army, as usual. She says to remind Lily about her pageant rehearsal tomorrow." "I'll have her back by noon," Jack promised. This easy exchange of parental details still felt surreal sometimes. Co-parenting with the man he'd once vowed to destroy. Life took strange turns. As if reading his thoughts, Andrew said quietly, "I never imagined we'd end up here." "Me neither," Jack admitted, "but it's where she needs us to be." From the forest's edge, Lily called excitedly, "Dad! Daddy, come see what Scout found." The two men exchanged a glance, acknowledgement of the strange family they had become, and moved together toward the child who connected them, following the wolf who had set it all in motion. And as Jack watched his daughter's face light up with joy, he felt the final fragments of his bitterness begin to dissolve. There would always be scars, always be grief for the years lost, and the wife who hadn't lived to see this day. But here, now, in this moment, there was also healing. There was Emma, alive and thriving. There was Scout, the unlikely savior. And there was a future that, against all odds, contained hope. The unimaginable had indeed happened, not when a biker left a little girl in the forest as food for wild wolves, but when a wild wolf led a broken man to find not only a lost child, but his own path back to humanity. Life takes unexpected turns, often leading us through the darkest forests of grief and betrayal. As we age, the weight of past injustices can become a prison of our own making. Jack's journey reminds us that even after 15 years of bitter isolation, redemption remains possible. When Scout led Jack to that abandoned child, he didn't just save Lily, he saved himself. Sometimes our greatest healing comes through helping others, even when every instinct tells us to turn away. The courage to face truth after years of comfortable lies. The strength to choose forgiveness when vengeance stands within reach. The wisdom to prioritize a child's well-being over personal satisfaction. These are the quiet heroics of advancing age. Perhaps in your own life there are relationships that seem beyond repair, truths that remain unspoken, or paths to reconciliation that appear impossibly overgrown. Jack's story speaks to us all. It's never too late to find your way back from the wilderness, to rebuild what was broken, and to discover that sometimes the most profound acts of love require letting go of what might have been to embrace what can still be. The autumn leaves swirled in golden eddies around the porch of Jack's cabin, now expanded into a proper home, one with a bright blue door and a bedroom painted in lilac for a certain 11-year-old who insisted it was the color of magic. Lily, Emma, as she'd begun to call herself again, perched on the porch railing, her laughter ringing through the trees as Scout, now a full-grown wolf with a silver-streaked muzzle, nosed at her hand for the treat she held just out of reach. "You'll spoil him," Jack called from the doorway, grinning as he wiped sawdust from his hands. The furniture business he'd started, Reynolds reclaimed, had taken off faster than he'd expected. Turns out, people paid good money for tables made from the fallen oaks of Blackwood Forest, especially when each piece came with a story. "He deserves it," Emma declared, finally tossing the biscuit. Scout caught it mid-air with a satisfied whoomp. "He's the reason we're all here." A car crunched up the gravel drive, Andrew's SUV, now dotted with bumper stickers from Emma's soccer games and school plays. Margaret stepped out first, balancing a pie in one hand and a wrapped gift in the other. "Happy birthday, Jack," she said, pressing the gift into his hands. Inside was a framed photo. 5-year-old Emma, grinning gap-toothed on his shoulders the first weekend he'd taken her camping. The inscription read, "First of many." Andrew lingered by the car, then cleared his throat. "Got something for you, too." He handed Jack a legal envelope. Jack raised an eyebrow. "If this is another lawsuit..." "It's the deed to the old Reynolds and Williams office," Andrew said quietly. "The one they seized after your arrest. I bought it back last month. It's yours, if you want it." The weight of the offer settled between them. That building had held their dreams once, before greed and betrayal shattered them. Emma bounded over, Scout at her heels. "Are you guys being awkward again?" She rolled her eyes, then grabbed both their hands. "Come on, the bonfire's ready, and Hammer promised to tell the story about the time you two," she pointed at Jack and Andrew, "got lost in the woods during that business retreat and had to eat wild berries." Andrew groaned. "That was your idea, Reynolds." Jack smirked. "And you cried when you thought they were poisonous." As the fire crackled to life and the Devil's Mercy crew arrived, bearing enough food to feed the forest, Jack watched Emma, his Emma, tuck herself between him and Andrew on the log bench, her hands sketching excited shapes in the air as she recounted her version of the day Scout found her in the snow. Margaret caught Jack's eye over the flames and smiled. It wasn't the life they'd planned, but it was the one they'd fought for. Scout flopped onto Jack's boots with a contented sigh, his tail thumping as Emma leaned her head against Jack's shoulder. And for the first time in 20 years, Jack Reynolds felt the last of the ice in his chest melt away. The end.